Hi, and welcome to a Better HVAC podcast. My name is Ben Reed. I'll be your host today, and I want to take you on a journey through the chaotic and troubled world of residential HVAC through conversations with industry experts, frontline workers, policymakers, and entrepreneurs. Today, we have a fellow named Edward Louie. Or is it Lewis or Louie?
Louie.
Louie, perfect. Try to get that in there for the rest of the conversation. Edward Louie is a building energy efficiency research engineer. Is there a shorter way to say that?
Probably not. PNNL, we just have very long titles for everybody.
Okay, yeah, it's a long title and then with a long organization. So he's a building energy efficiency research engineer at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. So PNNL, which is a division of DOE or it's an affiliate of DOE. I always forget what the association is there.
So DOE runs 17 national labs that are peppered throughout the country. Many of these national labs started when we were working on the Manhattan Project. The division of labor was to ensure that no one lab or one worker knew what they were actually putting together in the final concept. And then since the world wars were over, these national labs became a entity for the good of society rather than making things that blow up. And so now the National Lab Network is involved with research across the board of science. Everything you can think of, we probably have somebody working on that type of research. We have people that spend their days in waders counting fish and listening to hydrophones that are placed near dams to understand the acoustic environment that dams cause to fish. What does that have to do with Department of Energy? It's hydroelectrics, and so there's the nature, wildlife, and electricity nexus, and so we have people working on that.
Just a lot of nerds.
A lot of nerds. PNNL, it has a staff that when I started, shortly after COVID started, it crossed over 5,000 staff, and we might be getting close to 6,000 staff now. So
that's pretty cool.
That's a lot of nerds.
Yeah, there's a lot of nerds. I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
And yourself, you are a nerd. You have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in energy and environmental policy. And then you're also on the board of the Building Performance Association. And from reading through your bio, you're an early adopter of all types of high efficiency technology. And you are also a avid applied researcher. So you really like to test something out and then learn from those real world results instead of just hiding in a theoretical math equation. So I really love that. I'm also an applied research kind of guy. But back to your role at PNNL, what do you actually do there?
I work on research related to residential energy efficiency. Currently, I have a number of projects that I work on, but some of the cooler projects I work on is one, heat pump quality installation. So I'm trying to develop a workflow that contractors and state and utilities could adopt and require contractors that work in that energy efficiency program to use. And that this workflow would improve the reliability from job to job of heat pump installation quality. And so that's a really cool project. Another project that I'm working on is to develop the next step in heat pump and heat pump water heaters. So right now, heat pumps and heat pump water heaters are perfectly good for most situations, but you'll end up with situations like, okay, you got this short water heater that's underneath a staircase or in a knee wall or in a bedroom closet. Those are locations where current heat pump water heater products on the market are not able to serve. And so the next generation of heat pump water heaters are more location able to work in these kind of challenging locations, working on heat pumps that will work well in super cold climates, which is most of Canada and like the upper Northeast, the Midwest, North Dakota,
Alaska, right?
Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Yeah, those places. And get them to work without utilizing a lot of auxiliary heat or the need for natural gas as a backup. Those are two projects that get me out of bed each day.
Yeah, and super important. I hear a lot of chatter about people wanting to know more about cold weather heat pumps and to address some of those previous concerns. The last generation back in the 90s, the cold weather heat pumps were a pipe dream, But now the technology is finally at the point where they absolutely work. I've been seeing news stories about how in Norway and the Scandinavian countries, just like, that's the most heat pump adoption off pretty much out of all of Europe is in the coldest climates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the tech is there, and it's nice to know that there's a lot of attention being paid to trying to customize it to those maybe not edge cases, but to all the variety of different applications.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yep.
And related to heat pumps, you probably followed a little bit of my work with MeasureQuick. Jim is often talking about how we can't deal with heat pumps, we can't install them the same way that we have with our previous technologies. You are very much in that same space. That is your specialization, is trying to make sure that there's quality when it comes to installing these devices, because if you don't end up having all that special care and attention, design and commissioning, then you result in a device that'll probably deal with this new technology, like, the training side, but also they're always dealing with somebody else's crappy decisions. It is such a difficult role to be an HVAC contractor. I've said it a couple of times how you have to be a plumber, you have to be a mechanical engineer, you have to be a customer service expert, you have to be an electrician, you have to be like somewhat of a physics expert to really understand how the airflow is working throughout the home. It is just a lot of responsibility. But then on top of that, they're dealing with inadequate regulations, unenforced building codes, homeowners who don't budget for essential upgrades, and a complete lack of load calculations or duct testing in most homes, proliferated rules of thumb like oversized equipment, and then just contractors that are generally racing to the bottom of the pricing scale to try to just secure the next job. It's just everybody's so anxious to get the next job secured from their customer base that they aren't actually thinking about any of the work that they're currently doing, but they also just have nothing that's enabling them to be successful. So out of all those flurry of problems that an HVAC contractor would be facing when trying to install heat pumps properly or to be a part of decarbonizing our built environment, what of those problems would you want to fix right now if you just had to choose one?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I work on a quality installation documentation workflow app that we would love to get states and utilities and contractors to use. The DOE has heard from utilities and states and customers and contractors, installation quality is not very good. They are hearing that there are many heat pumps that are not delivering the efficiency that's stated on the label, that customers are not happy with the comfort that the heat pump is providing. They are receiving callbacks within the first year, which becomes a cost that the contractor needs to eat. We put funding for a national lab to work on solving this research problem. And so they funded PNNL to develop a way to easily document installation quality. And this project actually started with the original intent of how do we be able to document installation quality without having another person there looking over the contractor's shoulder or entering the home afterwards. And the reason for not having the person-to-person interaction is because this project started at the beginning of COVID. And so it's a desire to have as few human-to-human interactions as possible. But now that COVID is no longer a deadly disease that we don't have a vaccine to manage the effects of, now the project has evolved to how do we just make it easy for contractors to know what the requirements are? How do we make it easy to document the quality? And how do we make it easy for the contractors to use this process? And how do we make it easy for states to be able to review the reports or the data that was collected? And so we've developed a tool that enables all those things to occur.
And you also have the workforce crisis, where it's not just that there was COVID, which restricted human-to-human interaction, but you have just such a shortage of skilled individuals. And so the more digital tools that you can give them to accelerate their ability to adopt best practices, I think that's just a big win across the board for an industry that's hurting for good talent.
Absolutely. Yes. Like one of the features I think a company owner, an HVAC company owner would like about this app is that it does walk a new employee through step by step from pre-installation, meaning evaluate the home, size the equipment, select the equipment. There are photo prompts to ask you to, for example, screenshot the extended heating capacity tables of the equipment you're selected and highlight what is the design temperature of that location and what is the heating capacity at the design temperature. And so that photo prompt of dropping that screenshot in means that a new tech who maybe only knows about nameplate rating, but doesn't know that heat pumps have to be sized at the design conditions. If your design condition is not the 47 Fahrenheit, then you have to look at an extended performance table to know what is the capacity at your design temperature. So there's a photo prompt for that. And so like this walks people through how to the step-by-steps needed to do a good install from both the design side to the install steps on this install day.
And this is a question that we hadn't really prepared for, but I just came to my mind. What is the success criteria of that app, of that sort of initiative? Do you want to have 1,000 projects done in that app by X date, or those efforts like to demonstrate that here's what's possible? How would you, I guess, grade whether or not that you've made an impact on the market with that?
We don't have necessarily set like a particular target, but we would love to continue to track the number of states that have indicated that they want to use this as their main quality installation documentation tool. We are not allowed to tell the states that they must use this tool, that they can't use MeasureQuick or any other app, because it's not about trying to just self-promote themselves or keep others from entering the marketplace. So this is just one choice. It is free to use and it is open source. And there are many checkboxes that would incentivize a state or utility to want to adopt this workflow tool versus another one that maybe required them to pay a lump sum of money or subscription to some private label software company in order to use it.
Awesome. We'll get to the open source stuff a little bit later because I like the fact that's an open source tool. But let's get into something a little bit more juicy. When we talked a couple of weeks back, you said the phrase that residential HVAC professionals are a bunch of whiny babies. What did you mean by that?
So I said that in the context of that HVAC industry has, for some reason or another, has shirked on a lot of their job scope that's fully within their trade to do. For example, duct sealing, insulation, and duct repair work. We have heard stories that some weatherization states' weatherization programs have stopped attempting to try to get HVAC companies to do weatherization on ducts because they were not able to find any HVAC companies willing to do that work. And I was not aware of this pushback, so I fell off my chair when I heard that. But this is coming from a utility, so they have done a lot of effort to try to HVAC contractors to do this weatherization work. So that's one example. As I tried to work with contractors to review and jog their interest in when they see that we're requiring to do blower door, duct leakage testing, manual J calculations, they immediately push back and say, we don't own a blower door. We don't do these things. How are we going to use your workflow if we don't do these things? And so these are just all examples of ways that like the HVAC industry has shirked on their job scope. And rather than saying, no, we need to up our game, buy the correct tools to do a correct manual J, learn how to use the right software, CoolCalc, to actually do a manual J, their response is, we just don't want this to be a requirement. So to me, that sounds like they're whining, rather than taking ownership to do these things. But if we want heat pumps to work well in homes, then we do need to evaluate the quality of ducts. And I don't know about you, but I don't have X-ray vision to be able to like gauge how leaky a duct is just by looking at it. Even in new construction, when the ducts are so brand new, I find sometimes real leakers, and
all the time.
I cannot even locate the leaks until I get my fog machine out and dump a bunch of fog into my duct blaster and then see where it starts billowing out. Because oftentimes you're looking into a dark attic and you can't see anything.
That's the right way to do it, is the duct testing. But a lot of activities that HVAC contractors are going to do is a lot of it just comes down to money. And their business doesn't require them, for the most part. The majority of their business, the majority of homeowners, they don't care. They don't care if their ducts are leaking. There's nobody that's educating them about how that's going to impact the lifespan of their system or their energy use. Like maybe some utility programs are successful in that, but that's very rare. And so most contractors are just going to get by with whatever it is that allows them to secure that next job, because they have a lot of crap to deal with. And so that's the status quo, where I understand why they don't want to do that. I know that, like, from us, we're in the community of best practices, and we're surrounded by all these nerds that they read the ACA manuals. Some of them, like a lot of residential HVAC contractors I know, they're even members of ASHRAE because they are so hardcore and wanting to abide by best practices, but those are still just such a rarity in the industry. And so being that's the state of the market, like that, so much of this is just driven by what revenue can be gained by the next job. Well, what is it going to take for every home in North America to get to that point where we have load calcs, we have duct tests, we have blower door tests for all the homes? Because to get to decarbonizing, to be able to get to all these heat pumps that actually work properly, like that is the level. It's like a checklist of things. You need that design, you need the blower door, you need duct testing, you need commissioning, and that's the primary checklist. There's probably a couple others, but who's going to do that? Is that going to be, are contractors going to have to be forced to do that? Is it going to be raters or some other energy technicians that go out and they're the ones that are doing these auxiliary things that these whiny contractors aren't doing? Or is it going to be an entirely new form of business model that's going to have to take on those responsibilities?
Yeah, I certainly think that HVAC contractors need to take on these responsibilities. And the reason why I say that is because prior to PNNL, one of my previous jobs, I was a rater, and I would test the ducts. And when they don't pass, and there's new constructions, 4% leakage is the requirement. And the ones that didn't pass, sometimes I'm a little generous. So if you get a 5% leakage, I'll still let you go. But man, if you're starting to get 7, 8, 9, 10%, and I'm like, I can't look the other way at that point. They're so far off the requirement that we're going to have to just fail you. And I would do them a favor, okay? I would bring a fog machine, find where the leaks are, take spray paint and mark those locations, and then ask the builder to contact their HVAC contractor to come back and seal all these spots, and then I'll come back and retest. They come back and they seal half of those leaks, and then they call me back to retest. And remember, there's cost associated with truck rolling. This is not free retest service. And so they only sealed half the leaks, and so it's still above the requirements by far enough that they don't pass again. And so I've had enough of these instances that I think that to prove to myself that this business model sucks. It does not make anybody happy. I don't like going back to that same house. The HVAC contractor is unhappy if they have to go back. The builder's unhappy with both of us. Nobody wins. And the solution is, if the HVAC contractor can test their own ducts, they get that immediate feedback to know where to seal, and they get that experience and that knowledge.
It's related to a podcast by Brian Ord he just did recently with Kevin Hart from Haven. and they're talking about how there's like this learning loop that you need to go through. And if you don't actually like practice enough, then you're never actually going to gain those skills that you need to be able to do the work that you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
So that you're advocating for that exact same thing, is that they're just like, we need to force contractors to practice the things that they're supposed to be doing, because otherwise there's way too many wasted resources with the alternative business model, because there's too many stakeholders that are playing this game of telephone with trying to fix something, where the contractor, the HVAC contractor, is supposed to have that specialization and that responsibility. So I agree with that. And now, and on a related note, on that, trying to fix the issues at scale, there's new commissioning standards that are coming out, that are already out, ACA 310 and ASHRAE 221, which they're supposed to really address some of these failures in the industry. But are they, in your opinion, are they actually going to be successful, or is it going to just be like too many technical things that just HVAC contractors will just want to shy even more away from it because there's just too many steps? It's too onerous.
So one is ACA 310 and ASHRAE 221. Neither of those have a process of converting those standards into something actionable. It's easy for the contractor to actually like document their work, and then for somebody to be able to review that work. And so they're just standards. Like our quality install tool that we developed actually converts some of those requirements into something actionable. Take a picture of your vacuum decay test setup, and then take a picture of the results of your decay test. That's actionable. But when reviewing the ACA 310 and ASHRAE 221 requirements, like the folks that myself who reviewed and others at PNNL, became apparent that if the contractor has to do every single one of those items, the cost of an HVAC installation is going to be very high. And the number of heat pumps that will be installed is going to be very low. And that is highly problematic. It becomes a question of, can we incorporate maybe like 70% of those the requirements in that standard and still get close to 100% quality without necessarily doing all those steps? I think so. And so it becomes a game of, okay, this is the gold standard, and then the other side is do nothing. Can we pick something in between? And I think we've successfully walked that line, of course, like at PNNL.
Okay.
And I think what's going to happen at each state and utility when they adopt their quality installation requirements for their program for Inflation Reduction Act is that there will be additional debates at each state and at each utility program about where on that spectrum, whether it's 100% all the way to ACA 310 and ASHRAE 221, or zero, nothing, or something in between, and what that will look like. And I'm sure a lot of the debates will be hinged around, do we require duct blaster testing or blower door testing or not? Do we require manual J's, yes or no? Those will be the hinge points. I don't think that many people will walk at requiring documentation of a pressure decay test or a vacuum decay test, but they might. But they are lesser issues than a blower door or a duct leakage test. But when presented with those objections, my response is, okay, how are you doing a manual J accurately if you don't know the duct leakage rate or the building's leakage rate? Are you guessing at these numbers? And then how far are you? Like, can you get within 2 ACH 50 consistently? If you can, then I'll let you not run your blower door. But if you can't consistently, when I come back after you and do a blower door test to see if your guess is correct, and you're not within 2 ACH 50, then I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go back to doing blower doors. And no one can tell me that they can consistently guess within even 2 ACH 50s.
I've even heard a different podcast where it was a couple of these veterans of the industry who they do follow these principles on a regular basis. And they would try to estimate, being like, okay, what is my ACH 50 going to be? And even though they could be right like 70, 80% of the time, where they're wrong, they're like very wrong, because there are so many surprises that, even for an experienced expert in those kind of best practices, you still can't hit those like type of consistency if you're just guessing, even with experience. Most of the industry, from what I've heard, just they like pencil whip it. They don't actually, because nobody checks their work. Nobody checks like there aren't auditors that are saying, hey, did you actually do this work? Did you take those measurements? And nobody is looking over their shoulders.
Yeah. And so like with this workflow, what we do is we ask one of the photo documentations is take a photo of your blower door setup and then take a photo of the manometer or the screenshot of the manometer output if you're using your digital app. And then that part becomes part of one of the photo requirements to upload. And then you're also required to attach a PDF of your manual J. And so it's very easy for a verifier to then look at that screen capture. And by the way, all these things are timestamped. So if you take a photo, it's timestamped and GPS located. So, you can't just be re-uploading the same photo over and over again. It's very easy to run a computer software to scan these PDF reports and see, is the same timestamp reappearing from this person?
And all the files have the metadata built in.
Exactly. So the metadata is like on the file. And so you can have a OCR software just check the metadata. And so then does the duct leakage and the blower door results match within the PDF appended to it on the manual J? If it's not, then yeah, you have a problem. At some point, somebody will develop AI algorithms to be able to read these PDFs and be able to do these checks. But at this point, we're not to that level of sophistication, but it's possible.
I think XOI is getting pretty close, actually.
There you go.
But on the topic of software, on the topic of like innovation through software, I think that you and I both have an interest in, or we believe that technology will enable new business models that contractors will be able to accelerate their pace of change, to be able to become more effective, to embrace best practices a little bit faster. A couple months ago, I did a bunch of research into maintenance plans and then came up with a framework for the contractors could follow full stack HVAC, where all the different layers of their business, they could actually automate with various levels of software. And then we had a conversation on LinkedIn about how maybe there's a novel opportunity for smaller businesses to pop up that maybe they weren't originally HVAC contractors, like one-man businesses from people from outside of the industry, let's say displaced tech workers. They're just like, hey, look at that. There's a whole bunch of grant money available. All I need is a van, and then I can go and start doing some installation of heat pumps, of ductless heat pumps, because those are a lot easier to deploy. That, in relation to that, you did some work in plotting out the business model of what this could look like. And then what was the result of that little exercise with those spreadsheets and building out a business model for a one-man HVAC installation shop that would take advantage of all the easy money that's going to be coming down the line for heat pump installations?
Yes, the spreadsheet that I looked at is to ask for myself, okay, if I were to start an one-man HVAC company, how much capital investment do I need to make in terms of like buying a van, buying tools and stuff? And let's say I don't have that cash in my pocket. And so I take out a loan and I punched in 10% interest for 5 years. Seems like a reasonable loan to pay for the van and equipment and stuff like that. And then if I then have that loan, how much would I need to charge per job, and how many jobs could I do per month in order to cover those costs? And not just the cost of the loan, but also cover business expenses. If I had to pay for a website, if I had to pay for an accountant to do bookkeeping and taxes for me, if I had to pay for advertising and Google AdSense or Instagram ads or something, whatever, if I had to pay for all those things, or what if I had to even pay for a helper to help like lift an outdoor unit into place? Those things are heavy. And I had to pay, let's pay him $3 an hour. Okay. So it's above minimum wage, but enough so that you get somebody that will actually reliably show up with you each day and not be unreliable. And if you add those costs, then how much would you need to charge per job in labor in order to cover those? And we found numbers that are around $1,000. And that's a very reasonable number. And then if you...
For the labor on top of the equipment cost,
the
right?
labor on top of the equipment. And then the typical ductless heat pump is around $1,500. Then there's a few $100s in miscellaneous parts and stuff like your disconnect and heat pump stand and stuff like that. And there's permits,
And
put a number of
tools
permits and consumables and stuff like that. And we came up with a number that's around $4,500, $4,600 ductless heat pump job. And LinkedIn message feeds, people have said that they have seen quotes that are double that or triple that. And that is just shocking to me because like I've seen quotes for about, when I bought my first heat pump, I had the option of doing it DIY versus full turnkey. And that was in 2015. In 2015, the full turnkey price quoted to me for a one-to-one ductless heat pump was about $3,500. So then you adjust for inflation, you adjust for gas prices going up and stuff like that. Now you do that math, it's around $4,500. So my math checks out to what
it tracks.
It tracks.
Yeah.
But
And so that price discrepancy now, like it's...
how are people getting quotes for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for a one-to-one ductless heat pump? And so if people are able to charge those prices, that just means that there's a lot of profit to be made beyond just to cover your cost. And in the calculations of this spreadsheet, I've already factored in that I'm paying myself $100,000. And of course, that's before taxes. So then once you pay your taxes and put away money for your own personal 401k, you're only putting in your bank monthly deposits that sums to about like $69,000 per year. But that's just the reality. You're going to put all your money in your bank and put nothing in your retirement. You're literally going to screw yourself.
Yeah. So but that in that scenario though, like that's still enough to live on in a lot of states. And and also with this financial model, or this just kind of little exercise, I would call it.
Yeah.
You crowdsourced, there's 20 or 30 other people that were they were contributing to the business model too. I found that really interesting that you had a lot of people that were helping to correct little things or add additional details that helped make it a little bit more reasonable.
And so instead of being able to charge $4,500, if I'm charging $5,500 per job and there's still people willing to pay for that, then literally that means I'm making tons of profit in the business, or I can pay myself really well. Mm-hmm. In either case, that is just an opportunity for more people to enter the HVAC business.
It's an opportunity for more people to enter, but then there's a lot of naysayers too that were just like, oh, this is just going to cause a lot of problems because now you have all these people that don't know what they're doing that are going to exacerbate the quality install problem. So how would you mitigate that side of it?
See, so I don't think that's the case. I think when new people enter the business, first of all, they don't have the bad habits of the past. When you're learning HVAC, for example, like I learned a lot of my HVAC through the great free resources or low-cost resources that are available. We have wonderful experts that make excellent YouTube channels and excellent YouTube videos to learn HVAC from. And those people are not teaching how to do HVAC using the hack methods. No, they're teaching you the best practices. And if you learn from these great teachers, you're going to become a good HVAC business owner and a good HVAC technician. The other thing is you're not starting off with ancient tools. If you're going to buy new tools to start a new company, you're not going to have a rusty dial manifold gauge. You're going to buy digital tools because it's going to make your life easier.
Which those could be connected to something like the Field Piece app or Measure Quick.
Exactly. And then additionally, my vision is that the new heat pump rebate programs will require a quality installation workflow similar to the exact one that PNNL has developed. And that will walk the HVAC technicians through step-by-step from evaluating the space, doing manual J, selecting equipment, going through all the quality install steps involved in install day. And so you do that 10, 20, 30 times, you're going to get the gist of it. Those photo prompts are telling you what the best practices are. Like it's asking you to pull down below a 500 micron, and then it needs to stay under 500 microns for 10 or 15 minutes. That's the best practice. So if you follow those those prompts and you document that you did that, you're going to get a pretty good install.
So on the software angle, because a lot of this we're talking about how this is made possible because of software, even the best practices to help make sure that these new
YouTube
people that aren't
software. Sort
yeah, it's more of it's a media kind
Right,
of
right. Saying,
content engine.
I'm just saying, in the
What?
past, you could not learn this much about HVAC from such quality sources for next to nothing.
And I want to take it to the next level in saying that there actually might be space in the future, because I've seen movement, again, with MeasureQuick, how they've integrated with ACA to be able to produce VEO and VSP certificates, so like quality confirmations where ACA actually verifies it automatically through the measurements that come out of all of the pro-grade probes that are being used on the job. And what if the industry takes that to the next step, where if the proper probes are used following the proper workflows and maybe even the proper photos are taken, then it actually dispatches that information to some server that validates it against the IRA requirements. And then that is the automated verification of whether or not that project is eligible for the grant funding. Do you see it getting to that point?
I think we're a long ways to that level of sophistication, just because when you have utilities and state governments, when you have government involved, look at how fast the DMV is moving. Look how fast the IRS is moving. It might be a little bit optimistic to think that we'll get there that quickly.
I'm always an optimist, and
but
I understand that because it is a government program, there's a lot more hoops to jump through. But on the topic of optimism, I did see some naysayers and people comment on being like, what about all the other overhead of the business? Like you need like somebody in the back office, you need like some admin responsibility, because there's a lot more business related things, like even customer service, that you can't just have one person and a helper efficiently running around and doing installs all day. And where my mind went to is what's happening in the world of generative AI. Because now, instead of it just like the people using ChatGPT, that's not interesting to me. What's really interesting is people basically redefining what these AI bots are how they're supposed to act, and then deploying a swarm, like maybe 5, 10 of these with very particular roles where they're tuned. Each one of these bots is tuned to actually be a specific role, maybe within a business. And that would be so cool if there was if somebody came out with a solution where they'd have a virtual back office company that is just all these AI bots. One takes care of their customer service, one takes care of the bookkeeping, one takes care of the administrative duties, maybe one of them is an expert tech who can provide text-to-speech, a phone call, like you call this bot and it's just like, hey, I don't know how to deal with this problem that I'm experiencing with this Mitsubishi heat pump. And then the bot just literally walks them through it in a conversational method, instead of it being, I need to type something into my iPad to search on Google. So I just see that feature could be close, because like ChatDev is a good example of a project that is proving out that method in various different projects. So do you think that type of innovation would accelerate this business model too, or is that also just a bridge too far for the residential HVAC industry?
So I'm not sure on that, but related to the comments about you need an office person to answer the phone, no, you don't. There are software that you can use to literally like have somebody visit your website and put in their information, and then they can choose a date that is available on your calendar, and you have a calendar that they would choose their date, and then that will then send you a notification that, hey, this address wants this service, and they're asking you to be there at this time and stuff like that. And so that all can be automated, and more and more
without AI yet.
More and more, and it doesn't even need to be very advanced AI. Literally, just like regular like scheduling software and web,
not even AI,
stuff can do
regular
that.
FSM. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then I know lots of contractors that don't actually hire an accountant. They have QuickBooks on their smartphone, and they have a drive mileage app to document their business miles and stuff like that, and use that, and then it automatically generates a monthly report or yearly report that they can use for tax purposes and stuff like that. So a lot of the stuff, you don't need to get to the latest kind of developments in AI to be able to do. Like, these apps have existed to help one-man HVAC, one-man contractor type businesses be successful for years and years already.
I've spent too much time in startups, so sometimes I overcomplicate what's needed for an example. But So it's fun to dream. So now I want to transition into the topic of applied research, because that is something that you do a lot of. And I'd love to learn more about your methods. So, in your kind of experiments, you're doing an experiment behind you right now with a thermostat and a Corsi Rosenthal box. So
yeah.
Like what type of tools do you usually use? Is it pro grade tools, or do you have like custom made sensors? How do you verify the data sets? What's your approach?
No, well, the ideas on starting a research project comes from, my experience of the technology. So like, for example, like I bought this 120 volt ductless heat pump. And the reason why I wanted to try that is because I've done enough work to electrify my home that I no longer have any new spots on my circuit breaker panel to add another circuit. So if I want another ductless heat pump to, make this part of the house more comfortable, I have to tie it into an existing circuit. And so therefore it's going to have to be a 120 volt ductless heat pump. And so I tied into a circuit that I verified, because I have an energy meter that on every single circuit, branch circuit, I verified, yes, that there is never a time when this branch circuit uses a lot of energy. And so therefore there's lots of overhead on this branch circuit to tie this ductless heat pump to. But then once I installed it, I found that like it's a constant battle to like, okay, if I want it to be 72 at like head and chest level, in a certain cold day I have to set it to like 78 or 76, because the native sensor of this ductless heat pump, temperature sensor, is way up at the top of the ceiling. And that, every room has a thermal stratification. But then on a mild day, then you don't necessarily need to set it to 76 or 78, get 72. You can set it to 72 and get 72. Because on a mild day, there's not such a thermal stratification. So I'm like, well, I don't want to constantly have to play around with the remote and, do this. Like, is there a thermostat out there that I can buy that uses, a control logic that can like just constantly monitor that and like IR blast, the ductless heat pump head with a number in order to get the value that it has on its sensor within the unit. And so, I found a thermostat that claims to be able to do this. So I'm like, okay, well, it's not that expensive, so let's just buy it and test it, see if it works, and see if it improves the head and chest level thermal stability of this room. And so I purchased some temperature sensors that can monitor both the ceiling temperature and also the temperature at like head and chest level. And it records at 1 minute resolution, and it can record for months and months. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. And when searching for such temperature sensors, you have to be a little bit creative to think like, okay, well, what other applications would somebody want to buy a cheap temperature data logger for? And the main industry for this is actually in the vaccine and perishable goods shipping industry. So they make these credit card sized or smaller battery powered temperature sensors that can work at huge range of temperatures. Like, you can put them on dry ice and it won't destroy the battery. And you can put them in like, hot food and like, a container that keeps food hot and it won't get too hot. And so, they're very cheap because they're meant to be almost disposable. Once you ship the package and it arrives and they verify that, it didn't cross any temperature, thresholds and stuff, then that's good. Check the box, throw it away, and then it served its purpose. And so, these are, I think they were like $10 or something like that, for these sensors. And they're quite accurate. And so I use those. And for others, for example, the branch circuit energy monitor, I use an E-Gauge. And that is a well-known in the energy monitoring world. You can search on Google, like, best energy monitor, revenue grade or something like that. E-Gauge will come up as like the first, on the first page. And so, okay, there's that. And since then, there's other competition that has come in. There's another company, I think it's Emporia.
Yep, I have an Emporia monitor.
They make a energy monitor that has like 16 circuits, 16 CTs, and it's like a tenth of the price of an E-Gauge. And so there are market disruptors that come in, and then there are enough people that buy these things and write a review that compare them, that I didn't have to do that comparison. So like if I, like for another electric panel, I'm not going to buy another E-Gauge because, they're expensive. I'm going to buy it in Emporia because, looking online at the reviews, it does everything I want it to do at the tenth of the price. So when it comes to sensors, just need to have some creative thinking and then also do some Google research and stuff and find the right thing for your needs.
So, but that kind of validates a hypothesis that I have and why I wanted to learn about your methods. I believe that that professionals such as yourself might benefit from more of an open platform or an open framework for something that can be modularly connect to pretty much any type of sensor that you want. Personally, in my own home, I use Home Assistant, and I have dozens of temperature humidity sensors. I built my own IQ monitors. All these things have open source, firmware and, available documentation for how to interface with everything. You can send the data to anywhere you want, and you can build in, if you want to do, let's say, Python or use Jupyter notebooks, you can just press a button and it installs it as an extension inside of your environment. And then all of the data from your sensors can flow right into that without you having to be an expert in IT or in IoT devices or in sensors. So I guess what I'm leaning towards is that I kind of, both with your own personal sort of adoption of high-tech, gadgets, but also in your role in PNNL, is that I think that there's a missing piece on the market of something kind of similar to Home Assistant, but is actually tailor-made towards researchers, HVAC practitioners, some of the best that are out there who are trying to apply best practices, but oftentimes their selection of tools, they have to go with really expensive high-end tools that are, they're not really, they're not super easy to even get the data out of. But why isn't there something like an open source project that exists that's able to kind of merge all those needs to be able to do exactly what Home Assistant is doing for home automation, to be able to do it for HVAC diagnostics and building science sort of applications? So is that something that you would be a consumer, you'd be a participant of a project like that, or even would PNNL back something like that? Does PNNL get involved in open source projects like that?
PNNL does get into open source projects. In fact, a lot of for example, it's even the quality install tool that we've developed. Since it's funded by the federal government, there's not a desire to make the code not open source, and so it is an open source code. There's, for example, the code for CTA 2045, which is to do demand response of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and other devices. That standard is open for anybody to read and understand how to utilize the APIs and stuff like that. So yeah, the federal government does do a lot of work regarding sensors and controls. Voltron is another kind of sensor control-esque type thing that PNNL was heavily involved in. It's VOLTTRON or something like that. It's two T's.
I'll check that out.
And so there's that. But we also buy a lot of sensors from private companies. And you're right, not all of them are cost effective, and some of them are really expensive, and others
they're
just
usually made for
some
completely
of them have
different purposes.
Terrible data logger or something like that. But a lot of these companies are trying to develop an ecosystem for themselves. Like Hobo Onset is perhaps a fairly well-known company that has a lot of sensors in their portfolio to try to build an ecosystem where they have Hobo Link that is an online dashboard, and then you can hook up tons of different sensors that measure all sorts of different things to that. So there are companies trying to fill that space. Is DOE trying to compete with the private industry to try to develop an ecosystem? I don't think that they're going to be super on board of that type of thing.
To me, it's not about making another commercial competitive application. There's a massive hole in the market of being able to prove out best practices where the Raucous project, they're out of Pennsylvania, and it's just a whole bunch of volunteers that for years they've been using thousands of volunteer hours to buy up these IAQ sensors that are as low cost as they could find that have a high enough performance. They send them out to low-income neighborhoods, and then they do like a whole bunch of data logging. They help the homeowners understand what type of upgrades or what type of risks they have. And then they collect the data. They do all the data processing for them. It's very, very manual. And then there's even like, the home cam experiment where they probably custom baked a lot of different sensors to try to get the data that they want. And some of the data, is absolutely, you need scientific equipment to be able to get that data. But we're getting to a point where the sensor modules themselves are so high performance and low cost that if you basically had this platform that could assimilate all that data and like very quickly connect and disconnect from all these different types of sensor solutions, then I think that's, for additionally, like we need more success stories, we need more use cases, we need more data sets that are able to prove that it's just like, yeah, in climate zone, 1A, here is like, we have 200 of these platforms deployed, and we're going to we're going to implement these types of heat pump installations. Here's the measure quick data, and then here's 4 months of operational data. And we have blower door, and we have duct leakage data. But when we now have all of this additional environmental data that goes an order of magnitude beyond understanding what's actually happening in the environment, now we can see where the equipment failures come from with a definitive data set, instead of it just kind of instead of having holes in our understanding of how to improve the residential built environment. Because I've just encountered a lot of people that they are home brewing their own solutions to try to prove out all these new standards or these new kind of concepts in building science. And then they spend a crap ton of their time trying to build out the sensor platforms and to process the data, instead of spending their time where they really should be specialized in. So that's why I'm kind of passionate and trying to explore, is this a solution that should exist?
At PNNL, we have worked with Ecobee and Nest to like grab a bunch of their data, because they store like
a lot of data,
1 minute resolution not energy, but temperature, humidity, runtime data, whether the heat pump is in like stage 1 or stage 2, etc. And they have that data anonymized and available for download with APIs and stuff. So we have worked with like the Nest and the Ecobees of the world to collect that data. And then we've also worked with electric utilities who have smart meters to, get the high resolution energy data that's anonymized, able to be, linked to the Ecobee data. And so then we can look at the data, both, runtime, set point, energy data. And so post-installation performance data that we can collect without actually deploying a single sensor that, is specialized, like literally just the thermostat and the smart meter that's already in the house. I see where you're going with that. These will, I think, forever be like pilot research projects and stuff like that. The goal is that, and the vision, I think, is once heat pumps are installed correctly, then they will perform as expected. And certainly we would want to have certain utilities set up more sensors than just the Ecobee and the smart meter, and to have enough sensors to verify that is the case. But once it's verified, then as long as you're like replacing the furnace filter once every 6 months, or at least check it every few months and then determine when you need to replace it. But that's another thing, quality installation. When the customer gets a copy of that report, in that report, there's, again, instructions to tell the customer, hey, you need to check your filter and replace your filter. Otherwise, the heat pump isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, like a lot of contractors don't give a report to the customer at the end of even a $15,000 job. You go get an oil change at your car, you get a report on your car, and everything else they want to sell you on top of the health of the car. They claim that, oh my goodness, you need a brake fluid flush. It's not whether you need it or not. That's a different question, but it's there. HVAC industry currently doesn't have that, even though auto industry has it, the dental industry has it, the medical industry has that. You get a health report, dental report, whatever. It's time that the HVAC industry also has some reports that also include some instructions on what do you do. And so, for example, in the ductless heat pump, there's instructions on, hey, you need to clean this mesh filter. You need to deep clean your ductless heat pump every 2 or 3 years. So those types of things that will then come with a lot of this equipment, especially like ductless heat pump. If you're switching from like a central system to ductless heat pump, people are not that familiar with them. And so they need to come with something to come with their instructions. But there's the hope that like once it's installed correctly and that there's some reasonable care and maintenance to this equipment, that we won't need to constantly have a monitor to see is it working correctly.
I agree with that. Yeah. Because it's diminishing returns.
There is diminishing returns, but then we've run into a problem where like the concept of somebody checking in on the equipment is, my goodness, it's the government looking in on my lifestyle or something like that.
My home is my castle.
My home is my castle. And even though I like constantly share tons of like information on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, that's okay. When it comes to utility check, looking into my thermostat or something like that, that's not okay. So it's weird.
Well, we've been trained that corporations are friends. They would never do anything to harm us.
Right.
And government is evil, not corporations. Anyways, hypothetically, if somebody had a project to take to the DOE to say that, hey, would DOE fund this? Is there like funding rounds? Is that something you're very familiar with?
Yes.
Like, have you seen those types of projects get approved?
There is a process to apply, especially if you're like a private company or venture capitalist or nonprofit, to apply to a funding announcement opportunity. And then the applications get reviewed by whoever they assign as the experts. And if it's selected as something that we should work on, then there's that partnership. There are definitely avenues for this to happen, for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna keep that in mind as I do some more research in the next little while. But Edward, it's been great. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you well in all of your experiments.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, take care.
Bye. Thanks again.